Welcome. It is Verdict with Ted Cruz, Weekend Review. Ben Ferguson with you, and these are the stories that you may have missed that we talked about this week. First up, Senator Ted Cruz was on the ground at Camp Mystic. What did he see, and what did he learn about the flooding and the recovery efforts? Also, a massive rise in threats and attacks on ICE agents. Who's to blame? Could it be the leadership of the Democratic Party? We've got their quotes, and you can decide. And finally, the FBI has opened investigations into John Brennan and James Comey, the deep state that was in charge of trying to overthrow the will of the voters to get rid of Donald Trump, now may be finally held accountable for their actions. It's the Weekend Review, and it starts right now.
But I'll tell you, Ben, the most difficult thing I did today is I went to Camp Mystic. And I went and walked the grounds at Camp Mystic, and I think it may be the most horrifying thing I've ever seen in my life. You walk through, and actually as you walk through, the river was calm and peaceful and beautiful. But it rose, and it rose suddenly, and I will say the press, I think, has been less than clear and honest about how Camp Mystic is set up, because they've described it as saying, well, the cabins for the young girls were down by the riverbank, and all of the other cabins were up high. That's not accurate. And walking the grounds, the cabins are all hundreds of yards removed from the riverbank. There's a lot of distance between the river and where the cabin is. And the cabins are all about the same elevation. There's some differences, but not massive differences in elevation between the cabins at Mystic. And I was talking with one of the longtime employees there who said there had been a flood decades before, and it had gotten up. It had gotten up and crossed a little bit of the ground, and had come to sort of the foundation of one of the buildings that was not a cabin, but one of the buildings closer to the river, but it had never gotten close to the cabins. So that's one thing to understand. People say, well, gosh, this is prone to floods. Yes, but in the 100 years of Camp Mystic, there'd never been a flood where the water had gotten to the cabins. And in this case, the water was 8 feet deep in the cabins. Walking through, and every building, you could see the water line. You could see the water line outside the buildings, and it was 8 feet deep. And in the cabins, the water shattered the windows. It swept the furniture out. You looked in the cabins, and every one of the cabins, the furniture had been swept out. The windows were all shattered. And I got to tell you, look, there was one cabin. It's called the Bubble Inn. And it's a cabin at Mystic where the youngest girls were. And outside the Bubble Inn were 16 white crosses. And on each one of those was a name of a little girl. And they're names that we've read in the paper. They're names of little 7 and 8 year old girls, third graders, who lost their lives. And one of the crosses was for Dick Eastland, the camp director, who drowned trying to save the girls' lives. And he graduated from UT 50 years ago, and had spent 50 years of his life running this camp for girls. And he was in his Suburban. They showed me where he drowned. It was a couple of 100 yards from where I was standing in the river. He was trying to save the girls, and the water swept him away, and he drowned. And the 16 crosses. Reading those names, 2 of those little girls go to school with my daughter. They're third graders at our school. The parents of one of those little girls lives a block away from me. And I'll tell you, I just knelt and wept. There were families there, Ben. There was a mom and dad who was kneeling in front of those crosses. and they were kissing the cross. And I stood back. I didn't want to interrupt their grieving, but just watching them. The mom came to that cabin, the Bubble Inn, and she just broke down in tears. In front of every cabin, there were the children's belongings. There were trunks. There were electric fans. There were slippers and flip-flops and Crocs. There were teddy bears. There were stuffed animals everywhere. These are little girls. And many of them have their names on them. And there were moms and dads picking through the rubble, looking for their girls' belongings. And I don't know which of those moms and dads lost a daughter. We know of 27 who were lost, and there may be more. There are 11 that are missing. And there were girls picking through the rubble. I don't know if those girls were campers themselves who had survived. I don't know if they're siblings who had lost a sibling. But everyone is walking around. Shell shock doesn't begin to describe it. They're up on the field. There was a field that was basically a parking lot for the cars of counselors. And the waters had thrown the cars on top of each other. It was like they were matchbox cars, just flipped over. You saw car after car after car stacked on each other, flipped on its side, flipped over, tossed around. The dining hall, an entire wall of the dining hall had been ripped off. They had heavy wooden tables that filled the dining hall. Every one of them had been pulled out. And the Bubble Inn, which is where a large percentage of the fatalities occurred, the water swept in and just pulled those girls out the windows. Seeing that, and I saw it first from the helicopter, and you could see all their belongings spread out, but then standing there and viewing it from the perspective of a dad. You know, I've helped my daughters pack their trunks. Can't pick up every year. You go and pick up your daughter's trunk, and it's a joyful time. Our state is mourning right now, Ben.
I tell you, for everyone listening, and I say this, just pray for the people that are affected. Pray for the people in Texas. Pray for the families who are still without their loved ones. They're still trying to find them. Pray for the moms and the dads who are planning the funerals, as we know people personally that are doing that and getting ready for that this week. Pray for the moms. God, please pray for the moms.
Yes. Yes.
And anything you can do to help with all of there's so many different groups that are helping the people in Comfort and Kerr County, and there are people that need help, and we focus so much on the kids, but there's a lot of elderly people that have been affected by this. There are a lot of people that lost their lives and all their belongings, and help any way you can with all of the nonprofits that are getting involved that are doing this, and we're going to keep you updated, but I would just say hug your babies.
And Ben, I want to say, Ben, I want to say three more things of encouragement. So, in Hunt, there's a store that's kind of a focal point. It's called the Hunt Store, and it's right at the junction of two of the highways. You go up one highway to go to one of the big camps. You go up another highway to go up to Mystic and La Junta, and actually La Junta is right across the street from the Hunt Store. The Hunt Store, the flood utterly gutted it. It's just ripped out in a hollow shell. I went and stopped at the Hunt Store and just visited people who were there or gathering there, and they'd actually changed the sign where it said Hunt Store, and instead of Hunt Store, they'd changed the sign to read Hunt Strong. And Heidi and Catherine were at the Hunt store last week. I mean, I've been there dozens of times. The owners were there. I just hugged them, and there were just like residents there who were just they're mourning and grieving. And I'll tell you, there was a giant barbecue truck. All right, so this is a story that is amazing that you're going to like. It's a barbecue truck from Rockport. Rockport is a town down on the Gulf Coast, and Rockport, when Hurricane Harvey hit, it devastated the Gulf Coast from deep East Texas to south, all the way really to Corpus Christi. So that's a lot of, and Rockport is right in there. It's by Port Aransas and Aransas Pass, and Rockport was devastated by Hurricane Harvey. Well, these guys, and these are big old Texans with big old beards. They look like ZZ Top, and they said, well, when Hurricane Harvey hit, there was a group from Hunt, Texas, little town in the hill country, that came down to Rockport and set up a food truck and fed us when we had lost our homes. And so they got in a truck and drove up this giant smoker and griller, and they were just giving away free barbecue. And one of the things that's really cool, I was in Rockport several times after Hurricane Harvey, and I was in all the towns up and down the Gulf Coast. But I was at those food trucks. So I don't recall visiting with someone and hearing that they were from Hunt down in Rockport. But you know what? In Rockport, they remembered that, and that's something we see happening. Just Texans coming together. The Cajun Navy from Louisiana came and were there helping people out. That was incredible, and I just had a chance. I visited with a family, one dad who introduced me to two little boys, and he said both of them lost some of their closest friends in the flood. And I said, little kids, and they're not much older than your boys, they shouldn't have to deal with death and loss at that age. But I'll tell you, in that same parking lot at the Hunt store, there was a car that had written on the back of it a Bible verse, written in like shaving cream on the back window. And it was Isaiah 43:2 that says, when you go through deep water, I will be with you.
Amen.
That is, look, you just asked folks to pray. Let me just underscore that for the moms and dads who have a yearning, gaping hole in their heart. I think there is no pain, no agony like losing a child. And nothing will ever fill that hole. That pain will never go away. But they need love. They need support. They need friends. They need families to hug them, to hold them tight, to just give them a shoulder to cry on, and to hold them up. And I got to tell you, this is a time for the church. One of the reasons Texas, I think, we are so resilient when facing natural disasters is because the church is strong in Texas, and you see churches step. I started the day actually by visiting with a number of chaplains who look, you want to talk about it was brutal on the chaplains when you're dealing with moms and dads who've lost their kids and they're just weeping. Even a chaplain, a man or woman of strong faith, I mean, it rips your heart out to be with a parent who's lost a 7 or 8-year-old daughter. And right down from the Hunt store, there was a church that had a big sign, free barbecue, lunch and dinner, all are welcome. And that's what the church should be doing, is helping and clothing and comforting and taking care of the needy. And that the church should always be doing that, but especially in time of crisis.
Now, if you want to hear the rest of this conversation, you can go back and listen to the full podcast from earlier this week. Now on to story number 2. Senator, I want to move to another big story, and that is the rising threat that has just become oh so real with federal law enforcement. And there was a shooter that ambushed Texas Border Patrol agents. Words from elected officials, in my opinion, have major influence, but also consequence. We have seen time and time again right now Democrats coming out and saying that ICE are evil, stand up to ICE, fight ICE. These are words coming from so many Democrats that are actually elected to office.
Well, listen, as you noted, words have consequence. And we have seen an awful lot of Democrats. We have seen the corporate media denounce ICE, call them Nazis, call them goose-stepping fascists. And unfortunately, that rhetoric fuels a rage. It fuels a rage that we have seen manifesting in violence over and over again. Leftists engaging in active violence against ICE agents. So, just a few days ago, an active shooter opened fire on ICE agents in McAllen, Texas. And here's the story from Fox News. Active shooter killed in attempt to ambush Border Patrol agents in Texas. One McAllen police officer wounded, but in stable condition following apparent planned ambush at Rio Grande Valley facility. And here's what the article says. An active shooter, armed with tactical gear and a rifle, opened fire upon Border Patrol agents as they arrived at a Border Patrol annex facility in McAllen, Texas, in the Rio Grande Valley on Monday, law enforcement sources say. Agents and local police returned fire and killed the gunman. No federal agents were hit, but one McAllen police officer was struck. Law enforcement sources say the officer is in stable condition. Quote, this morning, an individual opened fire at the entrance of the United States Border Patrol Sector Annex in McAllen, Texas. Both Border Patrol agents and local police helped neutralize the shooter, the Department of Homeland Security said in a statement to Fox News. This is an ongoing investigation led by the FBI. More information will be shared as it becomes available. Now, I'll tell you, I have walked into and out of that Border Patrol facility in McAllen, Texas, multiple times. The fact that you have violent criminals, and this is a criminal who lost his life because he showed up and wanted to shoot at law enforcement officials. He was doing so. We don't know this conclusively, but we can certainly infer that he was doing so because he's been listening to the extreme rhetoric that these are Nazis. And so he was like, you know what? If you've got Nazis, let's kill the Nazis. That is the consequence of the unhinged and deranged rhetoric on the left right now.
You talk about that rhetoric. Let's give actual quotes. House Minority Leader Hakeem Jeffries of New York said, employed people to, quote, fight the Trump administration in the streets, quote unquote. He also declared ICE agents, quote, will be unsuccessful in protecting their identities, no matter what it takes, advocating for doxing and putting their families at risk, ICE agents. Representative Jayapal of Washington called ICE agents, quote unquote, deranged, and said it is, quote, inspiring to obstruct immigration enforcement. Representative McIver of New Jersey, who was arrested and charged with forcibly impeding and interfering with federal officers outside an ICE detention facility, incited her supporters to, quote, shut down the city because we are at war, quote unquote. And even the former vice presidential candidate, the Minnesota governor, Tim Walz, getting in on the action, called ICE agents the modern-day Gestapo. Chicago's mayor this past week, Johnson, accused the ICE agents of being, quote-unquote, the secret police and, quote, terrorizing our communities. And you add in Eric Swalwell of California. He said it was, quote, his priority to ensure ICE agents, quote, are no longer faceless, comparing them to some 1800s bank robbers or some KGB officers in Russia. Words have consequences, and this is the rhetoric coming from some of your colleagues in D.C.
Well, and not only do they have consequences with the armed shooter who was killed in McAllen, Texas, but in North Texas, 11 people were arrested for plotting to ambush to kill ICE correction officers. And I want to read from this story from the Daily Wire. Quote, 11 people have been arrested in what law enforcement officers described as a, quote, planned ambush of corrections officers at an ICE detention facility in Alvarado, Texas, on July 4th. One Alvarado police officer was shot in the neck during the attack and is expected to survive. Quote, early reports indicate that more than a dozen masked individuals dressed in black arrived at the Prairieland ICE detention facility late Friday night and vandalized vehicles and security cameras in the parking lot, CBS News reported. The individuals launched fireworks in an apparent effort to lure law enforcement. On July 5th, Deputy Attorney General Tom Blanche posted on X, quote, "We are closely monitoring the attacks on DHS facilities in Prairieland, Texas and Portland, Oregon, and are coordinating with USAOs and our law enforcement partners. The department has zero tolerance for assaults on federal officers or property and will bring the full weight of the law against those responsible." On Monday, Acting U.S. Attorney Nancy Larson stated, quote, "We're here to tell you that late at night on July 4th, Friday night at approximately 10:37 p.m. at Prairieland ICE Detention Center in Alvarado, Texas, 10 to 12 individuals dressed in black, military-style clothing, began shooting fireworks and engaging in acts of vandalism at the facility that was part of an organized attack. Today, my office has charged 10 individuals with 3 counts of attempted murder of a federal officer.
Wow.
Each of the 10 are also charged with 3 counts of discharging a firearm in relation to a crime of violence. Each of these defendants faces a mandatory prison term of 10 years and up to life in prison. An additional co-conspirator was charged with obstruction of justice and conspiracy for attempting to conceal and destroy evidence in relation to the attack and faces up to 10 years in prison. And she continued, quote, "Let's discuss the incident. It was a planned ambush with the intent to kill ICE corrections officers. Make no mistake, this was not a so-called peaceful protest. It was indeed an ambush. This is the violence we are seeing." And it turns out when you call law enforcement officers, federal law enforcement officers that are keeping us safe, when you call them Nazis, when you call them Gestapo, lunatics on the left hear that, and sadly we are seeing over and over again they're acting with violence.
You look at, even on Tuesday, you had Democratic Senator Padilla of California and Cory Booker of New Jersey. They introduced that legislation to require ICE officers to, quote, "display clearly visible IDs and not wear masks no matter what during their enforcement operations," accusing, quote, "the Trump administration of alarming immigration enforcement tactics that have terrorized communities across California and the nation." And we know what the left has done here. They want to dox these ICE agents, their family members. They've been putting their kids even online and posting, people have been posting their home addresses, hoping that basically people go after the ICE agents who are just doing their jobs. That's how sick these people are.
Well, listen, there's a simple choice. There's a choice for Americans all across the country. Who do you stand with? Do you stand with cops? Do you stand with law enforcement agents? Do you stand with the men and women who risk their lives to keep us safe? You and I both stand with them. Or, as the Democrats have chosen, do you stand with illegal immigrants? Do you stand with murderers? Do you stand with rapists? Do you stand with child molesters? Do you stand with Venezuelan gang members who are engaged in human trafficking? Sadly, the Democrats, and inexplicably, they've decided to stand with the criminals and not law enforcement, and we're seeing the consequences.
As before, if you want to hear the rest of this conversation on this topic, you can go back and download the podcast from earlier this week to hear the entire thing. I want to get back to the big story, number 3 of the week, you may have missed. Senator, I want to get into this and get your reaction to the FBI launching an investigation into John Brennan, into James Comey, over the Trump-Russia probe. I think we need to go back and just remind people of what they were peddling that they knew was false. Basically, in my opinion, it was a coup attempt against the American people who chose Donald Trump in 2016 to be their president. They didn't like it, and they're like, "No worries, we'll do what the Lisa Page, Peter Strzok's were doing, right? We'll fix it. We'll take care of it after the fact, after he gets sworn in, and we're going to go after him, and we're going to undermine him. We're going to get him impeached, and that'll be all fine."
Well, I got to say, this is an astonishing story. John Brennan was the head of the CIA. James Comey was the head of the FBI. Both of them are right now under active criminal investigations. Here's what Fox News has reported. Quote, "Former CIA Director John Brennan and former FBI Director James Comey are under criminal investigation for potential wrongdoing related to the Trump-Russia probe, including allegedly making false statements to Congress," Justice Department sources told Fox News Digital. CIA Director John Ratcliffe referred evidence of wrongdoing by Brennan to FBI Director Kash Patel for potential prosecution, DOJ sources told Fox News Digital. The sources said the referral was received and told Fox News Digital that a criminal investigation into Brennan was opened and is underway. DOJ sources declined to provide further details. It is unclear at this point if the investigation spans beyond his alleged false statements to Congress. As for Comey, DOJ sources told Fox News Digital that an investigation into the former director is underway, but could not share details of what specifically is being probed. The full scope of the criminal investigations into Brennan and Comey is unclear, but two sources described the FBI's view of the duo's interactions as a, quote, conspiracy, which could open up a wide range of potential prosecutorial options. The FBI and the CIA declined comment.
I mean, this is massive on so many different levels. And John Brennan, by the way, he went on TV on MSNBC, and it was pretty funny because it was like he was just playing dumb. And it was like, I don't even know why they would be investigating me. I don't know what they would be looking at. I don't understand how this is even a thing. In his own words, and in fact, I'm going to play it because I want you to hear it. I want to get your reaction. Here's John Brennan, MSNBC, after finding out that he's the target of an investigation.
If there is an investigation, that people will be questioned. I would be questioned about it. But again, I've had no contact from them. But again, I testified in front of many, many congressional committees in the House and the Senate over the years. And I continue to explain exactly what we did during this process, why we tried to make sure we stayed true to our intelligence responsibilities and that we were not going to do anything at all to try to interfere in that election. And again, it was a challenging time, but also one I think that the people who actually worked this, both in terms of trying to collect intelligence prior to the election, and then the ones who put together the intelligence community assessment, they really, I think, showed the best of what the intelligence community and what CIA is made of. So again, I am clueless about what it is exactly that they may be investigating me for.
That may be the fastest senator I've ever heard John Brennan speak on TV ever. And I've watched him a lot over the years. That seemed like a very nervous man to me.
Well, and let me give a little more background on who John Brennan is. He was the director of the CIA from 2013 to 2017 under Barack Obama. Now, in 1976, John Brennan was a young man. 1976, you were not alive. Is that right, Ben?
I was not, no.
Now, you're enough of a political student and scholar. Let me ask you, who were the presidential candidates in 1976?
Jimmy Carter?
Yeah.
All right. And on the Republican side, I love when you play these games with me. Was Reagan 76 as well?
No. So Reagan ran, but he lost.
It was Ford.
It was Ford. Ford was the incumbent president. So remember, Richard Nixon had been president. He resigned. Yep. So Ford was the incumbent president. Reagan primaried Ford, but he lost in that primary. So the general election was Gerald Ford versus Jimmy Carter. Now, let me ask you, all right, in that election, who would you vote for?
I'm gonna probably go with the Republican there, not Jimmy Carter.
Yeah, look, although I will say, and by the way, do you know this is my first political memory? I'm about 10 years older than you are. My first political memory is when I was 5 years old, 1976, and my mother voted for Jimmy Carter. My mother's a strong conservative. She just thought Gerald Ford was an idiot. And I remember my father, who's an immigrant from Cuba, he was not yet a U.S. citizen. He is today, but he was not in 76. And my father was furious because he felt like my mom had the family's vote. And she voted for Jimmy Carter. And it's funny, my mom is 90 now, and she's incredible and a wonderful conservative and an incredible person. But when I bring this up, she's like, I'm sorry, I didn't know. Jimmy Carter was an absolute disaster. He was a left-wing wacko. He was the worst president this country had ever seen until Joe Biden. Joe Biden managed to be worse than Jimmy Carter. Now, how is this relevant to John Brennan? Well, John Brennan was in college at the time. He was faced with a choice between Gerald Ford and ultra left-wing crazy Jimmy Carter. What do you think John Brennan did?
I'm ready. Give me the punchline here.
He cast his vote for a guy named Gus Hall. Do you know who Gus Hall was?
I do not.
He was the presidential candidate for the Communist Party USA.
And there's your sign.
So John Brennan decided Jimmy Carter is too right-wing for him. And he voted for someone who, I'm not calling him a communist. He was the nominee of the Communist Party, and John Brennan said, I want America governed by a communist president. That's who Barack Obama put in charge of the CIA. And that's who was played an integral role in orchestrating the whole Russiagate fraud. And it's important to understand just how extreme and radical this guy is. I got to tell you, I don't know, to be honest, I don't know anybody else in public life who thought Jimmy Carter was too conservative.
Yeah.
John Brennan is literally to the left of every Democrat senator, every Democrat House member, every single person I've ever encountered in public life. The lefty loons all voted for Jimmy Carter, except for John Brennan, who said, nope, we need a full-on communist. That's who this guy is.
Final question on this. How concerned do you think these two individuals should be about this investigation? Or is this one of those moments where you say, okay, yeah, there's an investigation, but I don't have to worry because nothing ever really happens to us when we're the elites?
Well, listen, the greatest exposure they have is for lying to Congress, because lying to Congress, you're under oath, and lying under oath, that carries a prison sentence. That carries up to 5 years in prison. James Clapper, who was the director of national intelligence under Barack Obama, I think the evidence is very clear that he lied to Congress. Whether John Brennan did, whether James Comey did, I think this investigation will reveal. It will depend upon, there's no doubt they were terrible heads of the CIA and the FBI. Whether they committed criminal conduct or not, I think that is the purpose of this investigation. But I got to say, it is a big damn deal that the former head of the FBI and the former head of the CIA are being criminally investigated for felony conduct. That's what's happening right now.
As always, thank you for listening to Verdict with Senator Ted Cruz. Ben Ferguson with you. Don't forget to download my podcast, and you can listen to my podcast every other day you're not listening to Verdict, or each day when you listen to Verdict afterwards. I'd love to have you as a listener to, again, the Ben Ferguson podcast, and we will see you back here on Monday morning.